Hello and welcome back to another Lo-Fi session with me, Steve White. With the release of the Style Council documentary, Long Hot Summers, and the new album that's coming out featuring some of the best loved songs from the band, I'm going to talk about my contribution drumming wise to a much talked about and possibly controversial record at the time, Cafe Bleu. My first experience recording with the Style Council was actually in Paris. We went off to Paris in the summer of, or the early summer of 1983, and came back with a few contributions to what became known as Introducing the Style Council, which featured a few different songs and mixes, but specifically two of my favourite songs, one being The Great Long Hot Summer, and the second one being Paris Match, which is really one of my all-time favourite songs that was written by Paul. So my contribution to drumming on that record, Long Hot Summer, I get asked quite a lot about it because it has a kind of strange feel on the hi-hat. When I was playing around Deptford, around sort of the ages of 15, 16, 17, with Gary Wallace, when I first met Mick Talbot at the Albany Empire, there was lots of reggae being played around that area, and people would just open their windows and have little sound systems, or not so little sound systems. And there was a particular track, I didn't even ever find the name of the tune, but the hi-hat pattern on the song went like this. And yes, I borrowed it and it kind of worked for the song, and I got away with it. And that became the sort of hi-hat part to Long Hot Summer. Now the other song I mentioned is called Paris Match, and that reappears on Cafe Bleu in a version by Tracy Thorn. This version that appears on Introducing is known as the early version, and I kept it really, really simple, just playing sort of fairly standard pop drums. And there's nothing wrong with keeping things simple. It really, really does work. And that kind of worked for that particular song. And as I said, it's one of my all-time favourites that has been written by Paul. So we went off on tour, and work on the first album, the debut album, began in earnest. And we then presented the record and prepared to go back out on the road, and I think at some point somebody at the record company actually commented that the first song is an instrumental, and it's a kind of soulful piano piece featuring Mick obviously playing piano, a little bit of funky tambourine, and that led into what I consider one of Paul's best songs. Paul's got a lot of good songs, obviously. The Whole Point of No Return. Now this was just a version that Paul was doing just with voice and guitar. It's very, very simple, very, very stripped back. We did a version later on which came to have a more rhythmic feel. The rhythm was this. A bossa nova. And the reason I got to use quite a lot of these Latin inspired rhythms in those early days was because Paul didn't really want backbeats. He didn't want me playing. So my natural inclination was just to go more for that sort of slightly Brazilian influence feel. And if you listen to Piccadilly Trail, if you listen to Ever Had It Blue, or Everything to Lose, The Whole Point of No Return band version, I'm using sort of variations of bossa nova patterns, which I think really fitted the feel of the band at the time. So that came in a bit later, but the acoustic version of Whole Point of No Return is featured as the second track on Cafe Bleu. The third track is another instrumental. It features the great Billy Chapman on sax, and the rhythm for that was inspired by my kind of contribution to school dance bands when we used to play things like Days of Wine and Roses, and the feel that I was told to play was a beguine, and I'm not sure if it's a derivation of an Argentinian tango, but it kind of has this sort of feel. And you could just play it with a cross stick in the left hand and just the snare drum sort of playing little rhythms around it. And I'm absolutely convinced that drummers of a certain age will remember ticking away with those kind of little grooves. So when I was playing and rehearsing My Ship Came In, I was doing this sort of crappy little cod version of a Begin rhythm, a little inspired by my school dance band days. And I was just playing this on the snare drum with a more forceful repeated pattern in the bass drum. And that little variation of a school dance band rhythm became the drum part for My Ship Came In, which was really interesting to hear these kind of rhythms coming through. Having listened back recently, as you probably know, I'm not really massively into nostalgia, but it's a kind of an interesting thing because I'm also very proud of what I contributed to the music of the past. And at this particular time when we're all not getting the chance to play as much music as we would like to, just revisiting some of these old things, old contributions to albums is really, really nice. The interesting thing about this record is the diversity of the influences and the bravery, I think, of putting out a record that has 5 instrumentals on and has guest vocalists and also some amazing songs. Let's be absolutely truthful about it. And the variety of drumming, it kind of goes from a little bit go-go inspired sort of hip-hop type playing on Strength of Your Nature and a gospel, to like soulful swing and shuffle on Head Start for Happiness, to these Latin influenced things which are really, really cool. And on the next 2 tunes on the record, I got to use the brushes because that was what was required for Blue Cafe and for Paris Match, the Tracy Thorn version. So I'd got used to, over the years, plenty of that on a Saturday night, so it wasn't kind of out of my comfort zone to play the brushes on those 2 particular tunes. The first one, Blue Cafe, I absolutely love that. I think Paul plays brilliantly. The guitar sounds beautiful on that, and I think it was like a semi-acoustic that he was using, an electrical semi-acoustic. And he kind of reminds me a little bit of George Benson in some of those little licks, which is absolutely great. And then Tracy's version of A Paris Match, which is also fantastic, but just because of the memories that I have from going out to Paris just after my 18th birthday, the early version is always the one that just kind of tips it for me. So then we had another instrumental, again featuring, I think, Billy and maybe Stuart Prosser on trumpet. This one is one of the most controversial tunes in the Style Council armoury, Dropping Bombs on the White House. Now, just a brief explanation. When we talk about dropping bombs, it's a jazz inspired phrase. The great drummer Kenny Clarke was one of the first drummers of the bebop ilk to separate the bass drum out and not play it on all 4 beats to the bar, but actually play a rhythm in the ride cymbal and the hi-hat. And that interplay that I'm doing between the snare drum and the bass drum is where the term dropping bombs actually comes from. It's not anything that's very, very ominous or dark. It's just a kind of a jazz phrase. But obviously, dropping bombs on the White House. As we'd say, my name is Steve White, so please don't get too angry. It was just a nice little instrumental to play. I was very much influenced by the great Buddy Rich at that point, and still am. And to have the opportunity on a pop record to do an intro that kind of reminded me of what I'd heard Buddy doing on endless records, the holding the hi-hat. So pretty kind of standard sort of bebop fare, but what I must kind of accentuate at this point is that we as a band never tried to sort of say we were jazz musicians. We were all inspired and we all love jazz, but in the same way that you listen to, say, something like the Modern Jazz Quartet and they intertwine classical music and jazz, but maybe they are amazing musicians, but in the way that they did that, we were just taking elements of jazz that we loved and combining it with pop music. That was our kind of take on it, nothing too sort of highbrow or pretentious. But it was amazing because for the first time in my kind of career, I got to play a drum solo. Obviously, later on, picking up sticks became a feature of the solo sets. But back in the day, I was using a hybrid kit, I think you can call it that, with a Simmons bass drum and a real snare drum, and this particular cymbal, which is a Zildjian Earth Ride, and I'm not putting it up because it doesn't sound that fabulous, but that was the cymbal that was played on Dropping Bombs on the White House, and also you can hear it on Head Start for Happiness. At the start when I do that, that's actually that particular cymbal that I've had for 35, nearly 40 years. As I say, it was a Zildjian that I could afford, and I wonder why it was so cheap, because it probably didn't sound that great. And I bought it from Percussion Services in Southwark Park Road when I think my friend Gary Wallace was working as a Saturday boy there way back. So I've still got that cymbal, which is, I just thought I'd get it out just to say, some parts of that old kit still exist. But when I got to the part where I had the drum solo, I was listening at the time a lot to a record called Buddy Rich Live in London, recorded at Ronnie Scott's, and there's a particular tune where he plays a drum solo where he uses like a buzz roll, what's called a buzz roll. If you play a normal drum roll on the snare drum, it's 2 strokes in each hand. But if you actually let the sticks hit the head multiple times. And by the way, this is another one of my old Radio Kings that I've been playing with while I've been sort of at home so much. And this one I think is a late 40s. You know I'm not great on all the details, but it's got a beautiful Duco lacquer finish, which I absolutely love. And it's just got that beautiful kind of fat Radio King sound. So the solo on the record started off like this, and I just really sort of lifted it for my own sort of creative purposes. So I was playing like a multiple bounce roll, a press roll, whatever you like to call it, and just playing around with the accents. So that's just having a little bit of fun with the groove. I mean, I've not got the band here, so I'm just kind of demonstrating. But I just played that sort of influence from Mr. Rich, and just sort of went into some sort of paradiddle stuff, and it became sort of quite a fun thing to do live. And you know, bearing in mind I was only sort of 18 at the time, 18, 19. It was just a wonderful thing to be able to sort of play these kind of swing and sort of Latin rhythms on. I'm going to carry on a little bit later on with another sort of part 2 of this, because there's quite a lot to talk about in the second half of the record. As I say, I'm not kind of going nuts and crashing around the drums all the time, because that's not really what these things are about. It's about giving you an insight to the music and the time. And in the meantime, hopefully some of you would have seen the documentary, and you will kind of understand why I'm so proud of what we achieved as a band. So Paul, Mick, Dee, I salute you. See you soon.